Welcome to another Digital Photo Mentor video. Today we're outside on my patio and I'm going to do something a little bit different. I have a rant about a few things that are a little bit unpopular in photography. Some opinions that I have that not everybody agrees with. So I want to see where you're at and if you have any unpopular opinions. Let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about, checking my notes here, is something that I do and I've argued with other photographers about, and that is whether or not to use a UV filter on the front of your lenses. I put UV filters on all of my lenses because number one, they're a lot cheaper to replace than the lens if it gets broken. And the argument that people have against using them is that it degrades the image quality. So to that, my answer is I generally am not shooting really at a small aperture like f16 or f22. I'm not a landscape shooter, so it doesn't really come into play for me because I'm often shooting at mid-range apertures, 5.6, f8, or wide open. So my style tends to make that not a factor at all. So number one, like I said, it protects the front of my lens from falls, fingerprints, dust, all kinds of things. And the argument that it degrades quality doesn't really fly for my style of photography. It may for you. So I recommend putting a good UV filter on the front of all of your lenses to protect them. I've actually dropped a lens out of my bag, a really expensive one, like a Canon L series lens. It was probably, I think it's the 24-70, it's like a $2,500 lens. And it fell, there was broken glass, and the filter broke, but the lens did not. So it cost me about $100 to replace the filter because I don't buy inexpensive ones instead of $2,500 for a new lens. So that's my first rant of the day. Number two is advice that some other photography teachers or other photographers may give you, which is if you don't shoot in manual mode, you're not a real photographer. To that, I say hogwash. I have a lot of students that really struggle with manual mode, and there's so many things on a digital camera to learn when you get started that learning about exposure and white balance and focus modes and all the other buttons and the full choices you have inside your menu in your camera can be extremely overwhelming. So what I suggest is take that with a grain of salt when somebody says, if you don't shoot manually, you're not a real photographer, and just say, you know what, I'm learning and I'll get there eventually. But even me as a professional, I don't shoot manual all the time. And I don't recommend shooting manual all the time. It has a place, a time and a place, and I use manual for whenever I'm on a tripod. Basically, I'm also in manual mode. So that means that when nothing is changing, my conditions, lighting conditions are not changing, I'm not moving the camera around, the subject's not moving, so I'm doing a landscape or I'm doing a night photography or a portrait where the person is not moving, then I'm using a tripod and I'm using manual mode. But anytime where I'm just walking around, such as street photography, travel photography, I'm probably using aperture priority. That's my go-to 90 to 95% of the time. That's number two. Number three is always shoot raw. I'm a big proponent of shooting raw, and there are definitely some advantages to doing so. You get more data, and it's kind of allows you more margin for error. I've explained that to a couple people in my class recently, and it made a lot of sense to them as to why you want to shoot raw instead of just, okay, it has more data. Well, what does that do for me, right? More data means that you can actually make a mistake with your exposure, or you can get the white balance wrong and then correct it in post-production with a software that handles raw files. But the drawback is that you have to process your files. They're not processed by the camera, right? So what I recommend is a mixture of both. If you're just in the process of going from beginner to more intermediate and you want to start processing your images, I recommend shooting raw and JPEG. That way you'll have the JPEGs that you know what to do with, you're familiar with, you can process them, you can handle them, resize them for sharing online, and so on. And then you also have the raw files if you decide you want to go a little deeper into the world of processing. So my tip number three for those that say only shoot raw is shoot both in the interim, or actually sometimes I've even shot just JPEGs. My new Fuji X100F does a great job with JPEGs, and when I'm shooting street photography, or sometimes, to be honest, if I take my camera to a family event, I don't want to have to process raw files later, and they're mostly just candids to record the moment. So I will shoot JPEG. Sometimes I'll even hand the camera to my niece and nephew, who are, I better get this right, 8 and 11. They love taking pictures, and it's just easy for them to shoot away, and I can give the files to them later for them to have a look at as well. Number 4 is, what is the best camera? And you know what they say, the best camera is the one that you have. And I'm going to agree with that and strongly approve of shooting with your smartphone. Right? Smartphones have great technology. I have a Samsung S7 and I'm coveting the S9 right now. If I can justify the cost, I'll be getting an S9. So it takes really great pictures, and often that's all I have with me. I throw it in my purse, and it's always on my person. So if you're out and about and all you have is your phone, don't be worried about what people are going to think if you just took the picture with your phone. There's things that you can use in post-processing or using the Pro app for your camera that will give you more choices of selecting the aperture and focus and exposure. And you can do a really good job with your smartphone and apply the same principles that you do in the rest of your photography, meaning the lighting must be good, you must have a nice clear subject, and get nice and close so that the subject is really clear. Those are probably the 3 biggest tips I would give you for smartphone photography. Perhaps an article to come for future. Stay tuned on that one. But don't be afraid to take pictures with your smartphone and get really creative with them. Try and push yourself and do the best that you can with the tool that you have at the time. Speaking of tools, number 5 is Canon versus Nikon versus Sony versus Fuji versus Olympus, or all the other options on the market. Same debate about Apple versus PC. And I say all of those things are just tools. Whatever tools you use, if they're working for you, keep doing it. If you're PC and everybody else says, oh, you should be Mac because it's better for photography, but if you're happy with your results and you know how to use your PC and you're comfortable with it, keep doing that. If you're happy with your camera, keep using it. Don't feel like you need to upgrade to the latest, greatest thing just to keep up with your fellow photographers. If you're using tools that work and you're happy with the results, just keep doing it. Number 6, along the same lines of upgrading, is choosing to go full frame. I get a lot of questions about going from crop sensor to a full frame camera, and people feel like that this is the natural progression, that as your photography improves, you're naturally just going to go into a full frame camera. And I have an article on the website, which I'll link to below the video, for you to read if you're considering going full frame. I have 7 questions for you to ask yourself before you make that decision, because it's not just simply, okay, am I going to get better image quality? Yes. However, you're going to spend a lot more money. You might have to upgrade your lenses as well. And there are some drawbacks of going full frame. If you're used to a crop sensor, and let's say you have a 70 to 200 mil lens now, you're used to that range being 1.5, that focal length. So you're actually getting up to like a 300 millimeter lens. If you put that same lens on a full frame, you're going to have less reach with it. Okay? So if you're into sports or wildlife, bird photography in particular, where you want those big long lenses, the full frame can actually be a detriment, to be a disadvantage. So think really carefully before you decide to switch to full frame. It's a big investment, and it's not always advantageous for everybody. So do your research and make an informed decision. That's all I have to say about that. Lastly, another question and debate that comes up sometimes in my classes and workshops, and definitely I've been asked through the website, is I want to go professional. I want to do photography professional. And I'm going to get to do the same type of question. Ask yourself really what it is that you want. If it's you want to do more photography and you want to spend more of your life involved in photography, I will tell you that being a professional, I probably did less photography than I do as a teacher or as somebody would as an amateur. I often use the ratio of 90% to 10%, meaning that the business of photography is 90% business and 10% photography. There's so much to think about and so much to know in terms of running a business, making a living doing it that often I see photographers burn out, working too many hours, not getting paid well enough. Pricing is extremely hard, setting your pricing. So go into it with your eyes open. And if you really want to be a professional for the rest of your life, know that it's an entire lifestyle and you need to know a lot about business and do a lot of business things as well as photography. If you just want to do more photography, honestly, I would say don't go professional then. Keep yourself as an amateur. There's nothing wrong with being amateur. The only stigma, I guess the difference between professional and amateur is professionals get paid. But I know a lot of amateur photographers that do amazing photography, and their work is no less, it's not any less good than the professionals. And I know some professionals who actually don't do such great work at all. So professional versus amateur is not a measure of how good of a photographer you are. Let your images speak for yourself in that regard. But if you enjoy photography and you want to do more of it, just do that. Make it a priority. Put it in your calendar. Attend a workshop. Join a camera club or a meetup group or a Facebook group. Go on a photography tour. Come with us. We have lots of opportunities for you to do those things and immerse yourself in photography. Just enjoy it for what it is, and let it be a hobby that it totally takes over your life, which it has a tendency of doing, right? Photography can become an obsession, whether you're a professional or an amateur. But the bottom line is you want to make sure that you're enjoying what you do. So whether you decide to upgrade to full frame, switch to Macintosh computers, or to go professional, the bottom line is I recommend that you make sure that you still enjoy it at the end of the day, because that's where you got in it in the first place, right? So there you have it. Those are 7 of some of my most unpopular opinions in regarding to photography. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of those, and if you have any unpopular opinions in regards to photography, let me know. I'd love to have a discussion about it. Take care. Until next time, keep shooting.